Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas and their time and their energy to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What contributions are they the most pleased about? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. Doris Prucell's name is synonymous with music. Doris is the daughter of a professional musician, a masterful music teacher, and a performer herself on the violin. She is the wife of William Prucell Sr., who is a University of Iowa music professor and a member of the Stradivari Quartet. They have 4 children, all professional musicians, William Jr., Wally, Ann, and Jeannie. Our community has benefited not only by Doris's pioneering and teaching the Suzuki method, but by her founding and directing the Prucell School of Music. This unique school, with over 480 students, teaches the Suzuki method of music education. Each year, students come to the school to learn to play the violin, cello, flute, or piano. Besides teaching and running the school, Doris travels the country promoting the Suzuki method and helps in training music teachers. She was a professor at Western Illinois University and the University of Northern Iowa. She occasionally performs with the Cedar Rapids Symphony. A graduate of Eastman School of Music, Doris has her Master's of Music from the University of Iowa. She's a member of First Presbyterian Church, Rotary, and other civic organizations, and she's lived in Iowa City 33 years. Welcome, Doris, to Tell Me Your Story. I'd like to start your story at the very beginning in Wisconsin, where I knew, or you told me, that you were born. Tell me about that and your father.
Well, I was born in Milwaukee. My father had come from a farm in Sheboygan, where his father had started one of the first bands in the whole area and taught all the neighbor farmer children to play. And they played for weddings and 4th of July celebrations. My father left the farm when he was 18 and went to Milwaukee to continue his study of the violin, and became a violinist in the theaters where the silent movies were shown. And he was a founding member of all the attempts to found a Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, which had a hard time, first of all, being so close to Chicago. The Chicago Symphony would come in, but this charter group of musicians that were of his generation really stuck with it. And shortly before he retired, the full-time Milwaukee Symphony did finally get a strong beginning, and he played with them also. During the Depression, when I was born, the musicians, of course, lost their jobs when the talkies came out, and so President Roosevelt started the WPA, and they started the Wisconsin Symphony Orchestra as a WPA project. And I was like 3-4 years old, and I've traveled a lot with the orchestra. All the players, mostly men, were my uncles, and I got to see a lot of the state of Wisconsin that way because they played all through the state.
And when did you decide that music was going to be your life's work?
I don't remember ever thinking anything else. My mother taught me how to play the piano when I was 3, and my father taught me to play the violin shortly after that. And it was just a very natural learning process. I think it was really the Suzuki method, only, 35 years sooner or something.
Was your mother musical also?
Well, she was a musical amateur, but she taught me how to sing and play the piano. And my father and mother would play every night when they were home. They'd play music together. From my earliest remembrances, I remember them playing pieces like Humoresque, and I'd be going to bed and listening to the music as I fell asleep.
There's part of you that many people don't know, that you were in a trio in high school. Tell me about that.
Well, I just had a very varied musical background. I think it served me very well. I sang in a girls' trio. That was the era of the Andrews Sisters, and this was a very popular thing. And we had one of the first TV shows in Milwaukee when very few people owned televisions. My parents would go and watch us at the corner appliance store. And we had opportunities to make it a career, but we didn't. And the members of the trio have remained my very dearest, closest friends.
And so you were off to, after graduation, instead of a career in stage and television and screen with your trio, you were off to Eastman. What brought you to Iowa City?
Well, my husband Bill accepted the viola position at the University of Iowa, which included the resident quartet, and every violist longs to play in a string quartet, so we came to Iowa City.
Did you meet him at Eastman?
Yes, we met actually in a string quartet.
Oh.
We were being coached by Gabor Rajto, who was a very fine Hungarian musician, and he was coaching us in a Bartók string quartet. And Bill was the only male, and the rest of us were female in the quartet. But I was the only one that bought the score, and I guess that impressed him.
There it goes. That was the turning point. So you have such a full story that you've got your performing, you've got your teaching, and then you have this musical family. And I'm going to get to all of those areas of your life. But let's talk about the Suzuki method that's so much a part of your story and what you've taught people and children and parents about it. How did you first hear about it, and tell people what the Suzuki method is?
Well, I first heard about the Suzuki method through an old teacher who had seen a film of Japanese children, and she was very excited about it, and she told me, this is for you because you have young children. And oftentimes people who are musicians themselves have a hard time teaching their own children. It's very hard to be patient when you have very high standards, and it's also hard to give the time when you're very busy practicing and performing yourself, and makes the children sometimes jealous of your music, and so they don't want to have anything to do with it. I had a wonderful bringing up in music, and I wanted to bring up my kids that way, but I didn't really know how. I mean, teaching by ear was sort of not the thing to do at this particular stage of my life. People worried that you'd never really learn how to read music. This lady told me about the Suzuki method, but I was too busy with my two little sons to do too much about it, until one day my oldest son, who was about 2.5, called me to the Captain Kangaroo show on television, very excited. He said, Mama, look what's on TV. And here was this film of about 1,000 Japanese youngsters about 5 years old playing the Bach Double Concerto, which we were teaching kids in high school. And at that point I knew I just had to look into this, and I spent about a year finding out about it, and there was no way to take training at that point, and their communication with Japan was impossible at that time too. Nobody spoke English over there, and nobody spoke Japanese, and it was hard to find out about it. But I ended up starting a sort of a Pioneer Suzuki program to give it a try in February of 1963. And that is where it all began. These kids were so incredible so soon that people really got excited about it and wanted to have this training for their children.
What makes it unique for viewers who are not familiar at all with this method of teaching music?
Well, I had taught, of course, traditionally for many years. In fact, I taught from the time I was 16, helping my father. But students didn't make this rapid progress. Children who played well and naturally at a young age were thought to be prodigies, and because their parents were musical, or they very few people started young enough to really develop during your most developmental years. But the Suzuki method really does things nature's way. It's also called the mother tongue approach, and you teach children to play the same way they learn to speak their own language, which is by imitating their parents and repeating things many times over and being highly motivated. And you know how motivated parents are to teach their children the first word. And of course it goes further than that. you say that word many times, the one word, and that makes the second word easier. So it's a very sequential learning thing where you perfect one step at a time, so there's never frustration. I mean, it all works together to be very highly motivating. And of course, when you're starting children as young as 3, you need the parents. And what you're doing is really creating a very special bond between the teacher and the parents and the child.
So the parent comes in and sits with the child. That's quite unique.
And the parent practices all week with the child. They have the hardest job because, I mean, as Suzuki has pointed out, it's up to the parents to create and keep alive a desire to learn in the child.
So they're playing the violin along with their 3-year-old?
They learn a little bit at the beginning, and some actually keep up. It's a wonderful chance to learn, too, for the price of one. But basically, they learn how to practice with their child without actually having to play. They guide them through the things the teacher has done at the lesson. And then there's a lot of stress on listening to recordings of music played beautifully, because when you're not coping with reading music right away, you can pay a lot of attention to the physical skills. And this is what made the Suzuki children in the beginning look so different from the children who were taught traditionally, because it's so much more natural. And when you're paying so much attention to feeling yourself on that instrument, the tone is beautiful. And so listening to and developing a beautiful tone it goes all the way through when you're playing Brahms concerto. I mean, we carry our students all the way through to very advanced performances, always with this step-by-step perfection, highly being motivated later by the music, by what actually the excitement and the beauty that's in the music, and always trying to play as beautifully as possible.
So you started out with your son, William Jr., and a few other students, and look where you are now, over 480.
Well, and the interesting thing is that the children that started within about the first 2 years of my Suzuki program, so many of them have gone to become professional musicians. There was quite a void and shortage of string musicians at one time, and school orchestras were struggling. And the Suzuki method has really changed that all around. Now there's terrible competition, actually, for string jobs.
Oh, so, okay, so now you've got the school, and then you got a building. Tell me about that part of the
Well,
history.
the building was really the most exciting part. I was teaching at Western Illinois because they gave me an opportunity to train teachers. They wanted to start a teacher training program at the university there. And I commuted, but it became so difficult because I had little children at home. And I decided, heck, I'm going to start my own school in Iowa City and have a teacher training program there. So I started looking for buildings, but couldn't find anything. And all of a sudden, the Czechoslovakian hall came on the market, and it was like I was struck by a bolt of lightning, because it was the most perfect building for a music school. It has a beautiful auditorium, and it had a large rehearsal room, and it looked old, and there's wood, and I mean, it just seemed to be crying out for music. And of course, you know, the Czechs were so musical, and so many musical events had gone on there, so we just sort of brought it back to life. And then the high point most recently was when we were able to build an addition to the school. And we dug under the school because we're on the National Register of Historic Places, and we couldn't do anything on the top, and we had no space to go out. We had a small lot, and so we excavated and we built rooms underneath the building, and so it's very exciting.
Tell me what a typical, if there is one, day at Prusel is.
Well, let me take, for instance, perhaps a Monday morning.
Okay.
It might start out in my room with a group of teachers that come from around the state for teacher training. And they might come weekly for a period of 6 months or something like that, and we'll cover as much as we can. They might come back the next year. And in the big room, we have a fine arts preschool going on, which is one of my favorite projects. The children really learn so much and do so well, have so much fun. And they're preparing for their Christmas program right now, and they demonstrate with instruments and song and so forth. During the lunch hour, we get students that come from school. We have to really fill up every possible time because there's so many students and the after-school hours are limited. And some high school students come on their free periods. And about 2 o'clock, we get some students that take off of school from far away, 100 miles, 115 miles, come to take lessons, and then they're in our advanced orchestra program. This is the group that went to Europe this summer.
Yes.
And from 4 to 6, we rehearse with the advanced orchestra. And then lessons will go on till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And some nights we'll have guest artist recitals or master classes. And on Fridays, it's pretty much the same type day, except we bring in all our elementary kids for group lessons and orchestra. So there's about 200 children in and out, and their parents and siblings. It's a very active place.
Look what you created, my goodness. I want to just touch briefly on your trip this summer. I'm sure that was another highlight for many parents and the 63 performers in this orchestra. And then I also want to talk about, I want you to tell me about, what if somebody who also, who wants to come to Prusso but can't afford it? What do you do with these kids?
Well, we have always taken care of children who, even before the school was founded, if you found a child who was really talented and motivated, you did all you could for that child. And we're a nonprofit school, and we've, from the first, tried to raise scholarship funds. We do help people as much as we can, and both with giving them funds and giving them work-study opportunities.
Right.
There's a need for more.
Okay. Now tell me about this summer, your trip, briefly about
Well,
what you did.
We received a marvelous grant for European travel, or travel anywhere, but hopefully out of the country. And that paid half the cost of every student in the orchestra. And then we had some fundraising which helped with the rest. So it was really a very reasonable trip, and we went to 4 countries that aren't the most highly traveled. We went to Czechoslovakia and Hungary, which I think was a marvelous experience for American students to experience, even with the change, the falling of the Iron Curtain. You still see that we have a very rich life in this country, and yet that they have riches that they can share with us too. Cultural riches, music and their love of the arts.
You went to Austria?
We also went to Austria. We appeared in the Vienna International Festival and won the first prize for string orchestra.
Congratulations.
And performed 9 concerts in 4 countries. So it was a wonderful trip. It was hard work. We feel like we had to take the kids on a trip just to have fun, just to make up for all the work.
You've led the most remarkable life, Doris. You've been a performer, like I mentioned, and this teaching that you've immersed yourself, and then your family. How have you balanced this? How have you managed to do all these things? What's your secret?
Well, it was hard on our kids. It was hard for me when they were little because they were also Suzuki students, which meant I was their mother and I had to practice with them. And I taught till about 7 o'clock at night, and then I'd come home and make supper, and then I'd pitch in and practice with 3 of them. So we'd be at it till 10 o'clock at night. So in some respects they suffered, but we really lead such a rich life. I think being in the Suzuki method, we've traveled all around the world to teach. To Australia and Japan and Europe and Canada, and we often take the children with us, and at least when they were small. And so they were so much in this environment, and I think a great deal of what they learned wasn't as much from actual practicing as from having this rich environment and getting to play along wherever we went. And I always felt I was doing this Suzuki method for my own children as well as for other children, and tried to balance it. And same thing when we started our family concerts. The children were young, and it was an opportunity we had an Arts Council grant, and we traveled through the state and to other states also to try to encourage other families to get involved with music and have a good time with it, which basically we did. We had fun with it, and we have such wonderful memories of the funny things that the kids would say to each other when we were practicing. And it's funny, a couple nights ago, I talked in my sleep. Bill told me about it in the morning. He wondered what era of my life I was in my dreams, because I said very clearly, I sure don't hear much practicing going on.
Is that you or your children or your students?
I don't know.
And you went off to perform in different symphonies in the United States, didn't you, when you had your children?
Well, yes. Before I had children, of course, before we came here, I played in the National Symphony in Washington, D.C., and the Eastman Rochester Orchestra, the Rochester Philharmonic. But when we came here, there weren't any real outlets, and so I traveled quite a lot with the Chicago Little Symphony, and I substituted with orchestras like the Dallas Symphony on some of their tours. So my mother and father moved to Iowa City, and they spent time with the children, which helped a lot.
I'm sure. I read an interview of your son, William Jr., in a newspaper article, and he was mentioning that when other families were gathered around the television, your family was playing chamber music. That must have been very, very satisfying.
Well, I don't think there's anything as satisfying as playing with your own children. And now our biggest joy is going to where they are and hearing their performances.
Let's talk about them. Tell me where each one is and what musical instrument they're about.
Well, son Bill is now first violinist with the Cleveland String Quartet and professor of violin at Eastman, which is where Bill and I met. And so, I mean, there can't be anything quite as touching as that. One of the very influential people in my life was my teacher at Eastman, and to think that my son is now in that position is really
Who is
very
his
touching.
teacher, Doris?
Millard Taylor. He was concertmaster of the Rochester Philharmonic, and in fact now he's been retired for many years, but he's still concertmaster of the Naples Philharmonic in Florida.
And he knows that you feel that way about him?
Oh, I'm sure he does.
So William Jr. is at Eastman and married to also someone in music.
Gwen Starker, who is a fine violinist and performing violinist.
And they have a child.
Alexandra, who is 7, who plays the violin.
Plays the violin. There it goes. That gene code's pulsating through this Prussel family. Then Wally is your celloist.
He's cellist with the Lyric Opera in Chicago. And his wife, Stephanie, is a Suzuki violin teacher and a performing violinist. They both graduated from the Eastman School of Music. And
they have a child?
They have a son, Zachary, who was 1 in October.
And too young for the Suzuki method.
But they play him to sleep every night.
Then your daughter is...
Anne is principal harpist with the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. And she's about to be married.
And to a musician?
To the principal hornist from the
You've got a hornist in your family.
Yes. In fact, he played with us. For the past 20 years, we've given a Christmas concert at First Presbyterian Church every Christmas Eve, and he performed with us last Christmas.
Wonderful. And then your youngest
is Jean, who graduated last June from the Cleveland Institute of Music, and she's a violinist, and she's been concertmaster of the Robert Shaw concerts in France, is going to return to do that next summer, and performs like San Diego Festival and the Erin in Switzerland Festival, and she's doing lots of wonderful things for someone that young.
Are you planning a reunion other than to perform at First Presbyterian Church? Are you going to go on tour your family in the near future?
No, it's too hard to get everybody away from their jobs.
Tell me about another part of your story is that you and Rosella Dirksen started the Bach Festival. It's become a tradition, or was a tradition in Iowa City for many, many years. Tell me about that part of your life.
Well, in 1973, we decided to start a Bach Festival. She was conductor of the Chamber Singers, and we had been doing cantatas and so forth in various churches, and we thought this would really be a wonderful thing to do and to bring to Iowa City major conductors and performers. And we did that for 12 years. We brought in fine conductors. Thor Johnson was here, Eifert Jones was here, Helmut Rilling was here, and many of our students, my violin students, performed in the orchestra, and our family performed in the orchestra. We kept that up for 12 years until she left the city, and the Bach Festival is still going with the Chamber Singers. I haven't been affiliated with it recently.
I don't think you have that much time.
No.
You mentioned this professor at Eastman who influenced you. Is anyone else in your life who's made a contribution or made a major difference in your life?
Well, my father, who was my teacher until I went to Eastman, which people were quite amazed at, that would actually work for 17 years. And I really am grateful for the training he gave me. He was an exceptional teacher as far as detail and being perfect. And then I went to Eastman and had a teacher that expanded my horizons musically. And then when I met Suzuki and studied with Suzuki and was influenced by him. And
he's still living.
He is, I believe, 92 now. He still teaches a full day, and he gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning and listens to graduation tapes of students. He's a tremendous motivator.
He lives in Tokyo?
In Matsumoto, Japan. And I've been there 3 times and worked with him around this country also. So,
Tell me, looking over all the things that you've done, is there one contribution or thing that has pleased you the most, or is it hard to pick one?
It's hard to pick. I think part of my enjoyment with music has been that it hasn't been narrow in one aspect of it. Perhaps my life seems very narrow because it's all connected with music, but there's been fun things like singing in the trio, travel, there's been the teaching, there's been the performance. I'm very proud of the fact that I was president of the Suzuki International Suzuki Association, the Suzuki Association of the Americas, and established the teacher training program for that, which I still am in charge of. There's been such a need to train teachers. And I think the establishment of the school, which now really seems to have a very firm foundation, which probably should be here 100 years from now.
That's a wonderful gift you've given this community. I talked with some of the parents of your students, and they mentioned, I said, tell me, some of the things about Doris as a teacher. They said you were very focused, patient, inspiring, demanding, and you were a motivator. How would you describe your style of teaching yourself? Is that hard to say? Is that hard to?
I don't know. I am not a planner in advance. I never have been. I just try to react to what is going on at the moment and try to see what that child's need is. Sometimes you have to be very strict and very demanding, and sometimes you have to be very low-key and lots of fun.
And I talked to, I think, 2 parents. One, you were very low-keyed, and one, you expected a lot. So maybe that tells you a little bit about their child in this program. Have you ever had children in this program who just couldn't learn this method?
No, and we believe that every child has ability, and a teacher has to have a very strong belief in that, because sometimes the lessons do get to be a trial. But we have lost students because of their parents, because it does make demands on the parents, and some parents just don't have the patience or the time to do this. And if the child isn't being worked with correctly, they do lose interest, and then they're not motivated. However, it's wonderful to see how many parents have just grown through this, and the wonderful bonding with their children that have helped some temperamental parents who have a temperamental child. It's actually, we don't look at Suzuki Method as just a music class. We look at it as sort of training for life. And I think it has helped a lot of families to enjoy each other.
When you relax, when you want to do, what do? Do you go play something or listen to music, or do you do something totally different? Or is just music just so much a part of your being?
Well, it seems like when we're not teaching or playing, the CD player's on. We enjoy listening to a lot of our children's performances and music in general. Right. And I love to read, and I get chances to read when we're on a trip. And I love water sports and things like that from my growing up in Wisconsin. But I don't have a lot of time for that these days.
I can see why. People hearing your story can understand why. Thank you, Doris, for coming today and sharing your story.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
My guest has been the well-known and much-respected teacher and musician Doris Prussel. She's the founder and director of the Prussel School of Music. An American pioneer of the Suzuki method of music education, Doris has not only taught this method, but she's written books and recorded music to use in the specialized teaching. She instills in her students a lifelong love of and fluency in music. Many of her students have become professional musicians. Parents and students have described her teaching style as inspiring, focused, positive, demanding, and masterful. Doris, an accomplished violinist, performs for our community and other communities as well. Her excellence in music and music education has enhanced, enriched, and inspired the young and the not so young. Doris Prussel has given this community a precious gift, the gift of music, and we thank her.